Yes, and there we go. Woo, there we go. Little crackle on the microphone. Yeah, it's a good time to support KRUU if you have a feeling for supporting incredible community amenities. Not to put out a pitch right here with city government, but you know what? We are a publicly and privately, independently community-supported station. Hillary Clinton herself said that. And joining us in the studio, speaking of politics and local politics, Michael Halley from the 4th Ward joining us for City Business. And also in the house, Jason Strong from FMC, or the Fairfield Media Center, depending on your drutherhood. And Michael, good to see you. It's almost like spring here. It's almost like St. Patrick's Day. Mm-hmm. What's happening in the world of city business?
All right. Well, let's get down to it.
Let's get down.
This is a informal review. I like to say that because it just makes it clear that this is me talking here, you know.
Oh, I thought you meant me.
I'm the informal one.
I'm pretty informal, too.
Yeah.
But
it's a review of our regular city council meeting from March 14th,
Fantastic.
2016. All right, so we had our consent agenda, which is just kind of normal, standard business. Employment at the fire department, filling in for hiring a full-time driver to fill in a position that had been vacated in November.
Right.
And a new communication specialist at the police department, and one has retired or is retiring. Actually, It's Chief Thomas's wife is retiring, so then they're promoting someone from within to be the chief of the communication specialist. So things shifting around a little bit, but that's pretty standard, especially that department. It's just, I guess it's a stressful line of work. But actually, they've maintained the officers for longer than usual, so that's good. But the communication specialist I've been helping the chief advertise that position on Facebook, and it's like every 2 months. He's like, hey, guess what? We need to advertise that position again. So I'm hoping they'll find some people who would really fit in and enjoy that position to the extent that they'll stay on for a while.
I just want to, for our listeners, if you're hearing cars in the background, you might not be much because these microphones are sort of set that way, but we have the windows open. On TV, if you're hearing it, we're not outside, but remember in the old days when we couldn't do that with the trains going by?
Yep, I remember. 7
horn honks for each train.
Oh, yeah. Per crossing. It was nuts.
As I was saying, some people in California go, oh, I love those trains. That's so quaint. It's like, yeah, quaint the first 15,000 times. After that, it was a little bit less than quaint.
Yeah. Well, the volume went up exponentially until the federal government stepped in and capped it because it was getting to the point where it was potentially damaging the human ears.
Yeah.
So the industry wanted it louder because cars are better well insulated now.
It's true, yeah.
So they wanted to be able to make sure that somebody who had the radio on or had their heat blasting or AC blasting could still hear the train. So
for those of us that live 50 feet from the railroad tracks,
we heard it a lot, yeah. All right. Public forums or public appearances, we had 2. One was our very own Councilman Darren Hamilton speaking on behalf of Kiwanis. He has been with that group for 17 years? I can't remember. He said something last night. It was something quite a long time. And they're doing their Kids' Day again. It's always the 3rd Saturday in September.
Okay. That's the big parade.
That's the big parade.
Cool.
Yep. And so the theme this year is When I Grow Up. And when he said that, I just kind of looked around. I'm like, well, I don't know if any of us have really grown up. You know, there's that concept when you're a kid that when you're a certain age, you're grown up. And then when you get to that age, you realize you got a lot of growing up to do. So maybe we never fully get to be that grown up.
Well, let's just say we're always growing up.
There we go.
Maybe that's safe to say. I don't know.
So when I grow up. All right. And then we heard again from Joan Harden, and she came and addressed the council some weeks ago about 2 traffic safety concerns on 2nd Street.
Right.
The first dealt with traffic turning from Madison onto 2nd, and that actually was dealt with. A new no parking here to corner sign was put in so that the space near the intersection is free for vehicles. so they can turn and get onto 2nd Street, which is great. The other one was a fence, and when the city looked into it, the fence that's blocking a view of traffic on Harrison was built according to city code. So the only way to amend it or fix that would be to change the code for the entire town. So committee felt like, well, it's not ideal that you don't have a great line of sight where you're supposed to stop, but if you roll forward a little bit, you can still see without rolling into the street. So it's one of those, it's not ideal, but there are 0 accidents as of 2009, no accident reports. It makes it hard for us to take action if it's, well, I'm telling you, there are a lot of near misses. It's like, well, we need the data of were there actually accidents. So she was recommending, and she had 30-some signatures from people in the area, changing the stop sign from 2nd Street stopping to Harrison stopping, and allowing 2nd to go through, or a 4-way stop. And again, that's not something the city does lightly. A lot of times the traffic patterns dictate where those stop signs go. So as per usual with city government or any government, we're like, well, let's look into it more. Let's get some more information. So we're going to find out if we've got some traffic count data. The DOT does traffic count data on a number of city streets, not all of them, but a number of them. And they did last year. So our city engineer is going to look into, do we have data on which street is used more? Is it Harrison or is it 2nd? But even the way the street is structured, if you change where it stops, it affects not just the traffic, but how should I say that there's a flow to the traffic in terms of which street has is given precedent in terms of the way the water is shed from it. So when you're driving on a street and you come to an intersection, and if the street you're on, if the contour of the road continues, that psychologically tells you that you have right of way, you continue. So if the street that is supposed to stop doesn't currently has that precedent set, it'll be kind of counterintuitive. So we're talking about it might be required to do more than just change the stop signs. You'd actually have to change the intersection so that then 2nd Street continued on, if that makes any sense. You know, that the road is always curved slightly for gutters. Right. So the road that continues goes through the intersection. So the intersection would actually potentially have to be modified, which then talking about money. And so what she thought was Joan thought was a very obvious solution, just change the stop signs. How easy is that? In reality, it's not quite all that easy. So we'll look into it. But again, according to police data, there are no accident reports since 2009 on that intersection. So it can't be really deemed a dangerous intersection unless there's some data to back that up. So, city government.
Yep. So more to look at. And I mean, it's good to take time. I mean, some things are just obvious. Mm-hmm. If data back that up straight away, there'd be no question. And then whatever the cost becomes a secondary thing. But it's an area of concern, obviously, or it wouldn't be coming up. Mm-hmm. How did Joan feel?
Dissatisfied. Mm. She'd just like us to take action right away. And just similar to what we did in Madison. Madison was an easier fix and more obvious. Mm-hmm. This one it's one of those situations where everyone knows it's not ideal, but the way to fix it requires more involvement than what maybe a citizen would think.
And so, in other words, it hasn't been dismissed. It's just more looking into what the best course of action is.
Yeah, exactly. So the Public Safety Transportation Committee will look at that, but actually Joan appealed. The committee's decision was to do nothing, and she appealed it to the council. So really, the council will look at it as a whole. It won't really go back to committee at this point.
I see. By the way, that's Michael Halley. I'm James Moore. This is KRUU-FM, and we do city business. I forgot to say at the onset here, at the after each city council session, we have an informal report on what went down there. The lunch afterwards, that's 12:30 today live, and then it is rebroadcast Thursdays at 6:30 p.m., and the following Monday morning, breakfast time, if you're up early and bright and bushy-tailed at 6:30 a.m. Most of us are. But at any rate, those are your options. And what else you got on the docket?
All right. Well, under our action items, we set a public hearing for the downtown facade improvement project.
Right.
The public hearing will be our next council meeting, March 28th, 7 o'clock at the council, City Hall, council chambers. And this is just the final step before the actual project goes out for finding a construction company. And the way that the grant that's paying for about half of this was worded is that it's one contractor doing all the work on all the multiple properties, but they can hire subcontractors to do specific things. So even if the overall contractor, for example, isn't local, they can still hire local companies
for pieces of it.
Mm-hmm. So we want to try to keep it local. Again, we have if it's within 5%, if 2 bids are within 5%, we'll go with the local, even if it's a little bit more, because other communities do something similar, but you don't want to incentivize it too far because our area, our local contractors bid projects in other towns in the area. Mm-hmm. And so everyone's doing that. And even if you want a local company to do the work for your project, they might not be available. They might have already scheduled work somewhere else. So everyone's kind of working in the area. So it would be imbalanced in a sense if we created a stronger than 5%, say 10%, 20% or something. We're willing to pay up to keep it local. Mm-hmm. If we did that, then other communities could follow suit. All right. Also, the public hearing, same night, for the amended plat of North Campus Village. That's on North B Street, kind of the northeast, very tip corner of campus. I think it's still considered MUM campus.
Okay. I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's a bunch of Vastu homes back there, and they're about to build some townhouse, condo, apartment type things that are more affordable.
Wow.
So that'll be the step before they can start moving is another public hearing. And then one more public hearing, same night, March 28th. It's for the nuisance abatement schedule. So if a property owner absolutely does not mow their grass or...
Oh, I thought you meant me.
or trim the hedges that are outgrowing over the sidewalk and the city has to come and do it, the bill for that is then assessed on their property tax. And then this is a step for them to be able to come and maybe argue their case. That's not fair. But for the entirety of last year, it looks like it was $3,000 total, and it was 10 properties. So still, I mean, I wouldn't want to pay the city to mow my grass because they charge too much. I could get some teenager to do it much cheaper. So it's better to stay on top of these things. The city code does say that you have to keep your front lawn and the area in front of your house to a certain level, and I'm guilty of letting it get probably right at that level.
I didn't want to say anything, Michael. I live right down from you.
I will let it get, right about that point, and then I'll mow it. So,
but the point is that you're saying, I'm so sorry. The point is that you're saying that the fine is assessed. It's not a fine that has to be paid. It's assessed to the taxes, and then
it comes off the property tax.
So in other words, it's just as real as that, but it's not quite as something.
It's not out of your pocket, but
right.
It's out of your pocket when you pay your property tax.
Right.
So it's better not to get that. But there are always several warnings before the city does it. The city won't just come and do it. They'll give you a chance.
Is it sometimes people are away or whatever?
I think that might be part of it. Sometimes,
but obviously you're still responsible for your property.
Yep. All righty. We had a couple of cigarette violations, local businesses selling to minors, and the police do this from time to time to check. Mm-hmm. And unless the council votes to say we want the $300 fine to stay in the city and stay in our general fund, the state will take it. So there were two, they were $300 each, and we said, well, we'd rather have that $600 in our general fund than for the state to have it. Not that we enjoy fining businesses, but that's the code for the state is $300 per violation. So,
and that's per violation. That's not like a warning and then a violation. It's
I'm not sure if there's a warning in that case.
Okay,
I mean, selling cigarettes to minors is.
Well, I'm not condoning. I'm just saying it's. I just didn't know the procedure.
Yeah. Well, I remember we talked about selling alcohol. There was.
That's what it was. Maybe I'm confused.
That was one where there was a chance for them to avoid a fine by doing training.
Mm-hmm. That was it.
Yeah. For cigarettes, I don't know. I haven't heard that one. Alrighty. Engineer service agreement for some water main work down on Fillmore and Liberty. That'll be good. We always like to upgrade our water pipes.
You bet.
Remember, did I talk about this last time? The lead. There's no lead in our water pipes.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few joints that have some lead soldering, but those get replaced as we replace everything.
You might just mention, the mayor had a report about the aquifers.
Yeah, so the water for city's water source is Jordan Well. It's an underground aquifer, naturally occurring. And so to get your water from a source like that as opposed to surface water means you get a more consistent water quality. And the consistency means that the filtering process and the treatment process can be, I'm not going to say the right word, so I'm going to use layman term, less intense or less chemical additives than when you're dealing with surface water. So in the case of Flint, Michigan, when they switched to a surface water source that was rather polluted,
river, I think.
Yeah, the river. The water treatment plant was treating it with more chemicals, and it was the chemicals they were treating it with that leached the lead out of the pipes. So the source didn't have the lead in it, the pipes had the lead in it, and the way they treated the source brought the lead out. Now ours, city's water is a little hard. It's got a little bit of a deposit that it leaves, and so that deposit that it leaves does the opposite. It will not leach anything from pipes. It leaves a little film that if you have a hot water heater after so many years, you might notice. If you ever have, I've got a small leak in my hot water heater, and there's what looks like a little stalactite starting to grow. It's the minerals from the water that deposit there. So, and then the limits for lead, our last time that the city was tested was 2013, and they were like, let's see, I did the math on it. 1/150th, if that makes any sense, or 0.63%. So under 1% of the limit. So we're so far under the limit. It's awesome. So that's on lead. No lead. Don't worry about lead.
Cool.
If you don't like mineral deposits, then that's another story because it is a little hard, but that's the trade-off. It is nice to be able to have a source that is...
Well, I remember in the old days they had water softeners, right? I think our family had one of those. It's just water. I think of water as being wet, but obviously there are different qualities, and the bottom line for this is that it's actually, it sounds like it's pretty good.
It is very, very good standards, very free of pollutants. So, if we were using, at some point that well may run dry, and we may go back to surface water, and then it'll be a different story. But the reservoirs used to be the source. They're man-made lakes, and so the issue there wasn't really ag runoff because there was the natty land was farmed, but now it's not. It's more algae when you're dealing with surface water. And if anybody remembers swimming in 2011, and then the
walking on water, you mean?
The pond getting closed because of the toxic algae bloom. I swam in it before it was closed, and I had an open wound on my foot, and it felt kind of funny after that. Yeah. So, some algae is really not good for you. Stay away from algae.
And there you have it, folks.
There you go. Word to the wise. All right, the last thing, and these are both kind of interesting.
It was a quickish, what sounded like a lot going on, but a quickish session?
Well, I've got a couple more.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm now the Personnel Committee Chairman, and our committee met twice since our last council meeting. First one was March 1st, and that was to discuss the fire department. So the fire department has been functioning for a number of years or decades using a full-time driver is always in the station. So 3 full-time drivers who rotate. And when I say always, I mean 24/7. Yep. And what that allows is then the paid on call or volunteer, the people who don't do this for a full-time profession, the driver can bring the truck to the location, and they call it the swarm method, and then everyone else meets them there. And so that makes the reaction time of the much faster. Right? So the response time. So we've had these 3-time drivers. One retired, or not retired, one quit in November, and since then someone's been filling in but hasn't been fully hired. Another is talking of retiring this calendar year. So just like we did in our water department, when we had attrition, we had a gentleman retire. We didn't immediately fill the position. We looked at the duties that person did and everyone else in the department, and actually then partnered with wastewater to cover some of the work this employee was doing, checking the meters, and realized that position did not need to be rehired. So that's a way to be more efficient. We wanted to look the same thing with the fire department. The meeting was essentially all the fire department personnel, all the part-time drivers and spouses wanting to have their say, and 100% of them were saying, leave it as it is. This isn't the right way to save funds. This is public safety we're talking about, and just wanted to say, don't do this. Mm-hmm. So it was over a 2-hour meeting. Everyone wanted to talk. Some misunderstandings were hopefully clarified. People were talking about, well, if we weren't spending all this money on the convention center, so, well, the only property tax that goes to the convention center is the insurance. So if you're talking about the way the building's being purchased, that's through local option sales tax, which doesn't affect the general fund, which is how the fire department is funded. So there are these ideas of the city is wasting money on wants instead of putting money on needs, mm-hmm. or like our new gymnasium that's opening Saturdays. Again, it's a want, not a need, etc. This is kind of a prevailing opinion. So,
but your point is that they're coming from different pots.
Yes, and the Park and Rec budget got cut $170,000 from last fiscal year to next. So they're looking at needing to rein in and be extremely more efficient. Mm-hmm. The fire department's budget, is not. I mean, it went slightly down, but it's not anything like that kind of level of cut. So, and the other thing is that the committee knows, we're aware that there are other communities that have other models. And so there are these other hybrid models where maybe there are 2 full-time drivers, and then some of the other time, like over the weekend, is filled in by part-time people. Mm-hmm. We just want to look into it. That's the entire discussion is, let's look into this. And we're hoping now that we'll have more cooperation from the fire department personnel and just exploring options. No one says we're going to do it. Even if, let's say, we didn't rehire that third position, mm-hmm. and tried another model and it didn't work, we can go back and do the old model. So we don't want it to be a sky is falling, end of the world scenario. We want it to say, let's look at how other communities have done this and see if we can find a model that offers the same or very close to the same level of protection, but a little less expensive.
But in this case, though, you did say 100% consensus from the fire department, the families and all that. So, yeah. I mean, all that gets weighed together. Mm-hmm. And is there a time frame on this?
Well, now that we decided to hire and fill that position full-time that was left vacant in November. Okay. So they're back to 3 full-time drivers. But this one employee is talking retiring, and at that point,
I see.
We'd like to be ready by then, Good. Whenever that is. He hasn't said exact date. With what would a 2-driver model look like? Gotcha. And that's to me the question at this point. We're not talking about going down to 1. We're talking going down, try 2, filling in with part-time, like other communities do, and see could that work for us.
Cool.
And what Last thing, yeah. Our Park and Rec superintendent, Derek Wolf-Cool, has resigned.
Wow.
And now we have to...
He was there quite a while?
He was there since 2008.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we need to hire someone new. And before we did that, there was a discussion on the committee and among the council that the Park and Rec board, the duties that were bequeathed to it back in 1972 in the city code, mm-hmm. aren't as applicable today as they were then. The department is completely different. Back then it was parks and an outdoor pool. That was before the Roosevelt School was converted into a fitness center. That was before the indoor pool was built, the racquetball courts, and obviously before this gym. So in practice, the Park and Rec Board had been allowing, because it's there within the code, they're right, but they've been allowing our city administrator to have fiscal oversight and personnel oversight. Both of those things actually in the code are granted to the board. And we felt that, well, before we hire, we should get this all cleared up and have the code match reality. Mm-hmm. So if that's what the administrator is doing, have the code make that clear that that's the administrator's role. So this should streamline things in that department and make whoever's coming on to fill that role as director, make their job a little simpler, not having to answer to quite so many people, but still be able to work with the board on special projects and all sorts of needs of the departments. So it's
another work in progress.
So if anyone wants to say anything about this, we're going to probably have our first reading of the amended ordinance on the March 28th council meeting.
And that's word to the wise about this. It's a change, or at least a matching of what it is going forward, and makes sense. And people may have opinions or not, right?
They may.
This is America, after all. And speaking of which, this is City Business. Michael Halley, Jason Strong in the house. I'm James Moore. Have yourself a good day. Michael, thanks so much for coming in.
You're welcome.